I'd like to start with Mr. Nyondo, energy expert who also worked for the mines, to work for the mining sector. What would you say is the state of play regarding power availability and infrastructure to serve the mining sector in Zambia?
Currently, I will say the mines are sitting at almost a required demand of about 1,000 megawatts, but unfortunately, we cannot get the entire 1,000. We're sitting roughly just above 700 megawatts that we are consuming in the mines. And we believe the current installed infrastructure sits at about 3,000 megawatts, but is constrained by the current climatic conditions that we have, which is the prevailing drought that's hitting, causing impact on the hydro bodies that contribute close to 90% of our generation. So I believe that's the status we are sitting at right now.
Maybe just to follow up on that, Mr. Nyondo. So how is the gap being?
As you heard from the moderator presentation that we got from GreenCo, we've had players come on board, and we thank the government for creating an enabling environment to allow an open access system to start flourishing, where we have, to my immediate right, GreenCo, and to my immediate left, we have Northwestern Energy Corporation. These are companies that are trying to meet the gap, and other companies that have come in, power traders, that are trying to meet that gap that is being created by the current situation. However, we are engaged with both government, ZESCO, as mining sector, to try and see how we can step in and meet the gap, maybe through other captive approaches. Thank you.
Mr. Kamanga, you've been a private player in the energy sector for a while. What would you actually say is the role of private players in providing power solutions to the mining sector?
The role of private players is very critical. As you know, our industry is made up of the national power utilities, ZESCO, and a few private players on the transmission as well as distribution side. But what remains key is that we've seen an increase in the IPPs, where the likes of Mamba have come through. Even now, in the midst of the gap or shortfalls of power, we've seen the traders stepping in, obviously with the support of the open access. But I think what remains a challenge, which obviously the planners may not have foreseen or may have neglected to address a couple of years back, is the fact that much as we are pushing towards getting more generation in, more consumers such as the mines being available to take the power, we still have a disconnect with the transmission infrastructure. Even today, if we wanted to get more power into the market through the traders, through the IPPs, unfortunately, the bottleneck will still remain the limited transmission network, which obviously is a matter that needs to be addressed, not in the next couple of years, but almost immediately. And I think this is where, if we have the Zambia-Tanzania interconnector coming through, we may see a bit of relief. The same with the interconnector, which is being done on the Kolwezi side by EN Power. So I think the whole market is evolving, and opportunities are being created at all levels, whether at generation, transmission, distribution, and trading for the private sector. Thank you.
ZESCO remains obviously a major player in the power subsector in Zambia. As a national utility, provide backbone services in terms of transmission. How would you say that being members of SAPP, Southern African Power Pool, helps meet the demand or needs that we have in Zambia for the mining sector?
Zambia sits in the center of the Southern African Power Pool and currently interconnected to several countries, mainly through transmission lines that run in Zimbabwe and Namibia. I think as already indicated, we are also looking at interconnecting, building new interconnectors to allow more power trade. But our involvement sitting with the Southern African Power Pool is it enables us when we have any deficit of power supplies within the country or any other member within the SAP, that we can have energy trade through that membership, the interconnected systems. From a national power security point of view, we would definitely love to have all the generation that we require inland, but that is not always feasible, as has been seen the past 2 years when our major generation facilities have been hit by the power deficit arising from the drought. So sitting as members of SAP have tried to mitigate this deficit. We are importing quite a huge amount of power from the interconnected utilities within the SAP, and it helps us to somewhat reduce load shedding that most of our customers as ZOSCO are being exposed to currently.
Maybe just to follow up on a question, not really a question, but an issue that Mr. Kamanga touched on regarding transmission bottlenecks internally within the country. What is ZESCO doing to address that? Because even if you are to build new generation assets in the country, but if you have issues with constrained transmission, that still doesn't solve the problem. So what is happening on the side of ZESCO to address that particular bottleneck?
The deficiencies in the transmission network are something that we are addressing actively. Historically, the major transmission network has sat along the line of rail to supply power from the major generation stations in the southern part of the country to the Copperbelt, extended now to Northwestern province, where the major consumption has been. We've had other areas that remained behind in terms of transmission, especially at high voltage, places like the northern province, Luapula, western province, that we are now actively working on to interconnect at high voltage so that we can improve the quality of supply to those areas. In terms of the northern province, we've been extending the grid gradually and will eventually form part of the Zambia-Tanzania interconnector. We've extended through to Serenje Pensulo, and from Pensulo recently to Mpika and Kasama. And then we'll be picking up the next phase now to connect it to the Tanzanian network. But even with that, we still come back and try to reinforce the grid even between Pensulo to Kasama to try and improve our voltage profiles, because these are long-distance transmission lines and we need to maintain the quality of the power. Regards Luapula, one of the areas that still suffers from poor quality supply because of the voltage at which we are supplying. We also have plans that are being implemented at the moment at procurement stage to construct at 330 kV a transmission line that will run through to Mansa, and then we'll run radio lines at 132 kV to service all the areas within the area so that we can improve the transmission network. We are also looking at reducing our transmission losses. So even areas like Lusaka into Kabwe, where we have a robust transmission network, but it is loaded at near capacity. We are also now working on a central corridor that will see us relieve the constrained network so that we can improve voltage profiles, reduce our transmission losses, and serve our customers better.
Chikoma, so you want to add a comment to that as well?
The transmission requirements in the country and in the region are huge, and really represent an opportunity for the private sector, for players who are in the infrastructure space, who want to build energy infrastructure. There's been a huge focus, of course, on building generation assets, and we need those. But there's also space for private players to participate in the build-out of the transmission network alongside our national utilities. We've seen some first steps in this direction. There's a company called EN Power that's looking to build an interconnector between Zambia and DRC. But it doesn't just have to be interconnectors. I think even within Zambia itself, there's a lot of value that can be unlocked by building transmission connections to areas where demand is growing quickly. And we don't have to rely on our national utility to do all of that work. They're certainly going to do most of it. They're going to maintain the responsibility for ensuring that our system operates reliably and safely. But within that responsibility that they have, there is room for private players in this sector. And I would encourage people that are in the energy infrastructure space to take a good hard look at the transmission and as well as distribution opportunities that exist.
Let me now turn to Professor Buckley. What can a company like yours, private sector company, yourself an entrepreneur, what could you do to service or to serve the mining industry in Zambia at various scales, where there's large mines, medium size, small mines? What can your company do?
Large scale, a typical unit that's a hectare size, 100 by 100, is about half a megawatt of electricity and about 4 megawatts of heat. That ratio holds up for smaller units as well. So we think that we're better off using local people and local manufacturing. Thanks.
Let me just perhaps ask the last two questions to my colleagues here. First one goes to Mr. Kamanga. We heard from the presentation by Chikoma some of the innovative financing that went into Zambia. But you also told us in your intro that you are a financial advisor. So what innovative financing mechanisms, Andrew, would you suggest could be applied or used to get power projects up on the ground?
When it comes to financing power projects, it's bankability, which obviously is underpinned by the tariffs. So whichever way you look at it, any project will only be viable if the cash flows are able to service the debt as well as equity component that the investors will be putting in. I think what remains as a key challenge in our setup, even as we explore the possibility of getting private sector participation, as ZESCO indicated, there's quite a number of transmission opportunities. But at the end of the day, what will be key even with open access, we have the grid code which allows for transfer of power using the existing networks. But if we are going to invest in additional transmission capacity, it means the investment or the tariff that is applicable for the use of that particular line would still have to be an economic price. And I think this is where it also is incumbent upon government to also look at ways in which incentives can be extended to the private sector, players who are bringing in the infrastructure. Of course, under the PPP arrangement, it's a lot easier, but at the end of the day, it's the cash flows which will determine whether the project is viable or not, and also the operating environment. If we continue on the same trajectory where investors are free to make their money and still be able to pay their debt service, where there's you allow them to transfer the capital as well as there are no foreign exchange restriction, then it makes the market fairly attractive. But to underpin the point of financing, I think also I just want to emphasize that we really need to re-look at the generation mix, because that's what will determine the blended tariffs that we are going to have. Yes, we do have tariffs from hydro, from thermal, from solar, but at the end of the day, whatever tariff we come up with, it should be able to meet the needs of the investor as well as the end user consumer, in this case, the mining consumers.
What is the impact of the power deficit on Zambia's mining sector competitiveness?
It's significant if we look at the current production plans that we have as a country in mining, and looking at that deficit I did allude to, we have an impact on that trajectory. So it is something that I believe every mining house is concerned about and is looking into and would like to have this addressed. But I think there was a question that you did pose that maybe I think it would be good to spell out that private sector can also participate in promoting innovation in this sector, because as we are at right now, we have about 300 odd megawatts of solar that is not being stored. So with innovation of storage, we have the rare minerals here in Zambia. With innovation of storage, we can have private sector look into establishing factories that can build batteries, or even innovation that can improve the storage of the power that is being harvested from the sun, for example, and also improve on the variation. One of the challenges we get with renewable energy is a variation. What do I mean by that? I basically mean the power not being very stable, because the climate or the weather conditions do change quite abruptly. So for mining, as you are very aware, we are a baseload dependent industry. What do I mean? Simple. We need the power 24 hours a day. If I'm subscribing for 100 megawatts, I need 100 megawatts at 18 in the morning, 18 hours at night. I need it at 6 in the morning. I need it at midnight at 100. So this is what we mean baseload power. So with that, I would really recommend private sector, and also probably research infrastructures, universities, schools, do look at a way of improving or coming up with ideas of how we can have this storage ability, because as we are going, we may have 1,000 megawatts of solar, which is not storable, and that would be unfortunate for us.
I did promise that I would allow the audience to ask questions, so I'm going to allow probably just 2 questions.
First thing, I would like to thank you, moderator, and your team of panelists for an excellent presentation and the example given, which is showing that the government is delivering on improving our energy sector and developing this sector as a force to reckon with. I've got questions, but I think these questions maybe are much more tied to ZESCO being the main anchor for our energy. You mentioned the Northern Interconnector from Pensulo to Kasama and so on. I would just like to know, what is the timeline for that? Okay. And similarly, what is the timeline for the hydro projects that are north of Luapula? The Kalungwishi project and the Lufubu project. And also, what is the timeline for the Luapula project from Pensulo to Mansa and distribution? And I'm saying that is that the whole northern part of Zambia, it's not going to fully realize its potential for industrialization until energy arrives. And I give an example. I'm developing a mine, as you know, Musam Resources in Chipili, and I'm stuck right now because I don't have industrial energy. I cannot start building a processing plant, value additional plant. So it's a very urgent, it should have been done yesterday. So ZESCO, can you tell us when are we going to have power in the northern part of Zambia so we can fast track our development? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Mbobe Nyondo, and my question is addressed to ZESCO. Firstly, I would like to offer some commendation on the changing climate. I remember in 2021, I think ZESCO had advertised construction of 3, if my memory is correct, serves me right, 300 megawatt power plants. And I think there were 3 proposed models, which was to build, own, and operate, build and hand over, and then the 3rd model was via IPP. We tried to get involved, but at the time, I think there was a concern in terms of the debt situation of ZESCO, which I'm happy to note that has mainly been resolved. I think this was mainly the debt owed to Mamba Collieries. What I found interesting was that it was mostly foreign-based firms that were showing interest, but they were mostly sitting on the fence to see where we were headed in terms of resolution of the debt situation of ZESCO. I would like to think that was a way of diversifying the power source and moving away from hydro. And my slight concern here is that we're still hearing of from ZESCO hydro development. I'd like to know where we are on that innovation and whether that approach is still being considered by ZESCO. In fact, most of the companies that were operating in South Africa were quite excited because I think in South Africa they actually have to pay for the land. And I think you need about, is it 5 hectares per megawatt? But we were offering the land here for free, maybe after discussions with the various chiefdoms.
So can we go in that order? ZESCO, there was a question from Dr. Mlenga, a question from Mr. Nyondo, both addressed to ZESCO. If you can quickly respond to those, and then we'll see how we handle the last one.
Thank you. So in terms of timelines, starting with construction of the Zambia-Tanzania interconnector, this is a project which is already being undertaken. It's at procurement stage. The financing has already been completed, and it's been apportioned for the obvious reason that would like to fast track this project. It's been packaged in 5 lots. 2 of them, the bids have already closed, and the evaluation is in progress. The 3 last lots have just gone out to tender. We anticipate that construction and the interconnection to Tanzania should be completed by 2027. In terms of the hydro power plants, Kalungushi and Lufubu, these are sitting with independent power producers. We don't have full control of the implementation. For Lufubu, we've already signed the power purchase agreement to enable them reach financial close. Kalungushi is being currently repackaged. It's been sitting with the private sector for a while, but I think there were certain issues associated with it, which I believe now have been resolved, and there are plans to move ahead and fast track that. With regards to the Ruapula, we are now moving into detailed feasibility studies. We are taking this as a regional project because it sits on the boundary between Zambia and DRC. So we have involvement also from our colleagues from DRC, and detailed feasibility studies are being coordinated by the Southern African Power Pool, and these studies are expected to start before the end of this year, and then we'll move forward from there. Developmental mode will depend whether we'll go just bilateral between the 2 governments or whether we involve private partnerships, both on the Zambian and DRC side. So this is actively being pursued as well.
Mr. Lwindi, sorry, before you leave that area, I think there was also a question about the transmission line, 330 kV you mentioned, into Mansa, and then 132 radio lines within the province of Ruapula. He also wants some short timelines for those.
Yes, for the transmission lines to deliver reliable power into the Ruapula province, this is under procurement. We anticipate that the transmission line will most likely arrive in Mansa even before the hydropower projects are completed. Hydropower projects will take probably 3.5 to 5 years to construct, but for a transmission line, this should be closed within 2 years. So we do need the transmission lines even for power evacuation, but as well as for stabilizing the power supplies. So we are fast tracking the transmission lines, which will eventually improve the power supply within the area. On the second question from Stanley, the sound was not very good. I didn't hear very clearly, but I believe it was referring to developmental modes. As a country now, ZASCO being a parastatal, we follow government guidelines. We are open to private investment. As ZASCO, we do not have the resources to move in and do development or projects, both be it generation projects or transmission projects. So we do rely on the private sector as well. Either we go through a triple P model where we can partner with the private sector, we pool our resources together and work on a project, or it can be a full independent power producer as an IPP, and ZESCO is always ready to uptake the power. At the moment, the requirement for ZESCO to uptake power is not mandatory. The electricity sector has been opened up, and so if you have an independent power producer who wants to put up a generation facility and he can find an off-taker for that power, that is also feasible and is actually working, where the independent power producer can put up his generation facility, can find a market for that power, and ZESCO will be available to use its transmission network to wheel that power from the point of generation to the end user.
This is an investment forum. We're inviting investors to come into this country, build plants, factories, manufacture things, including what you talked about. So I think we have been hearing that Zambia is open for business, so we do want to see indeed people manufacturing various items in the country. With that, I would like to say thank you to the panelists here in front of me, and please can you just join me in clapping for the panelists for the good work they've done.